This is the February Special Education Coordinator's monthly webinar. Today we're going to talk about manifestation determination reviews, MDRs, enrich reminders, some assessment information, and some upcoming events. We're going to talk briefly about manifestation determination reviews. This is not designed to be a thorough review of disciplinary procedures under IDEA, but is more a review of when and how to conduct a manifestation determination review. As with everything, there will be additional resources that are uploaded on the bookshelf, especially specific enriched directions. School authority has the ability to suspend a child with a disability for any behavior that violates the school's disciplinary code for up to 10 days during the school year. So any student with a disability may be suspended up to 10 days, and that's cumulative over the year, for any violation of the school's disciplinary code that carries the penalty of suspension. During these 10, what we call free days, no services have to be provided. Make sure that you're familiar with your school's disciplinary handbook. It's important that students with disabilities not be treated differently or have different consequences for their behavior than students without disabilities. Make sure you're familiar with what your school's disciplinary code says, what consequences are carried, because every school has a somewhat unique disciplinary handbook. So what happens if the child violates a student code of conduct after he's been identified as having a disability and has an IEP? Well, it depends. If the child has been suspended less than 10 days during the school year, he can be suspended again with no services provided, as long as the total of days for the year does not exceed 10. If, however, the additional suspension will push the child over the 10 free days, this might constitute a change of placement, and you would have to hold a manifestation determination review. And we'll talk more about change of placement in a minute. Each of your schools has described your particular policy and procedures of how you will track the disciplinary removals of students with disabilities. Don't let the 10th day sneak up on you. Make sure that your administrators or whoever handles your discipline process at your school is communicating with you frequently regarding decisions about discipline. As you approach the 10th day, you may need to consider holding an IEP meeting to address the behavior. Again, that's a case-by-case decision based on the student and his or her unique needs. But make sure that you are aware and following your school's process in your policies and procedures as to how you're tracking those 10-day removals. Let's talk about change of placement for disciplinary reasons for a moment. A change of placement for a disciplinary reason means that a school official has ordered the following change in placement for a child with disabilities. If a school official has determined that the child will be suspended or expelled for more than 10 consecutive days due to a behavior that violates the code of conduct, then that is a change of placement. So any suspension or a recommendation for expulsion where the out-of-school days would be more than 10 consecutive days is automatically considered a change of placement. The other way a change of placement occurs is when a child has been subjected to a pattern of short-term suspensions that would constitute a pattern because it meets the following three criteria, and it has to meet all three criteria in order to be considered a pattern of removals. The first criteria would be that the suspensions the child has accumulated during the year total more than 10. So the first thing that has to happen when you're looking for a pattern is, has he had more than 10 days out of school suspension total so far? If he has, then you look at the second criteria. Are the behaviors that resulted in these suspensions Pretty much or substantially the same behavior each time. In other words, has he been suspended for more than 10 days in the year for virtually the same behavior or substantially the same behavior each time? And were those suspensions about the same length? What's the total amount of time the child's been suspended, and how close in proximity are those suspensions to each other? And we'll talk about some examples in just a moment. But remember, all three of those criteria have to be met in order for it to be considered a change in placement. So let's talk about what happens when a change of placement occurs. Again, a change of placement would be any disciplinary removal for more than 10 consecutive days, and typically that would be a recommendation for expulsion, or when the disciplinary removals constitute that pattern. So on the date that the decision is made to change the child's placement for disciplinary reason, the school must notify the parent in writing of that decision. So you have to tell the parent in writing, we are going to change the child's placement for disciplinary reasons, and you have to provide the parents with a copy of the procedural safeguards notice. This is one of those times, like at least annually and upon initial evaluation or initial referral for evaluation, where you have to provide the parents procedural safeguards notice. So if a child's been recommended for expulsion, on the date that recommendation is made, the parent would have to be notified of that change of placement in writing, that recommendation, and the parent would need to get a copy of the procedural safeguards. Here's some examples of possible change of placements. A student is recommended for expulsion. We've kind of covered that already. Because the expulsion would be for more than 10 consecutive days, this would be considered a manifestation determination. This would be considered a change of placement, and you would have to conduct a manifestation determination review. The second example would be a student who's been suspended for 5 days for fighting, 3 days for disrespect, and now is recommended for another suspension of 3 days for cutting class. Does this last recommendation for cutting class involve a suspension for more than 10 consecutive days? No, it's just 3 days. And so we move to the pattern question. So we look at each of the criteria. Has the student with this last suspension accumulated more than 10 days during the year? Well, yes, he has. This will be his 11th day as part of these 3 days. So you move to the second criteria. Are the behaviors that led to the suspensions these 3 times for substantially the same behavior? Well, the first one was for fighting, the second for disrespect, the third for cutting class. So no, these are not substantially the same behavior, so this would not be considered a change of placement. The third example would be 3 days OSS for disrespect at the beginning of September, 3 days OSS for name calling, the end of September, 3 days OSS for disrespect, beginning of October, 3 days OSS for failure to follow directions, end of October. So is the last suspension, which puts him over the 10 days, more than 10 consecutive days? No, again, it's only for 3 consecutive days. So let's look at the pattern question. Has the student accumulated more than 10 days this year? Yep, this last suspension would put him over the 10-day, free 10 days. Are the behaviors that led to all these suspensions substantially the same behavior? Well, we've got disrespect, name calling, which is disrespect, and failure to follow directions, which is a form of disrespect. So yes, this is probably a change of placement because the behaviors are substantially the same. All right, let's look specifically at a manifestation determination review. During the MDR, the team is going to answer 2 questions. The first is the behavior that led to the disciplinary removal, this last suspension, caused by or had a direct and substantial relationship to the child's disability? This is a direct causal, so was the behavior directly caused by the child's disability? Or Is the behavior that led to the suspension or expulsion the direct result of the school's failure to implement the IEP? And this is an either or. If the answer to either of these questions is yes, then you go in a different direction, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So, what is a manifestation determination review? It's a meeting to determine if the behavior was a direct result of the disability or the school's failure to implement the IEP. Who's part of this decision or this review? It's the LEA rep from the school, the parent, and relevant members of the IEP team. Well, who determines who's a relevant member of the IEP team? The LEA rep and the parent determine who relevant members of the IEP team would be. When does an MDR have to occur? An MDR has to occur within 10 days of any decision to change the child's placement for disciplinary reasons. So after the 10 free days, or if the child is being recommended for expulsion, which would be for more than 10 consecutive days, you have to have a manifestation determination review in order to determine whether the behavior was a direct result or failure to implement the IEP. The team is going to meet and consider the following information. They're going to look at the child's IEP, documentation of the services that have been provided, the accommodations. They're going to ensure and talk about whether the services and accommodations have been provided as per the IEP. They're going to look at the student's discipline history. They'd look at the type of behavior, this specific behavior in relation to the discipline history, to look at, is this a repeated behavior or is this kind of an out of the blue isolated behavior? They'll look at teacher observations, parent input, any factors that might possibly contribute to this behavior that may or may not include medication or environmental issues or something that's gone on in the home. And then the presence and effectiveness of any current behavior supports. That would include any behavior goals, any other positive behavior supports, any behavior intervention plan, or anything like that. So the team meets and determines, for example, that the behavior is not a direct result of the student's disability, and it's not a direct result of failure to implement the. So the team determines no, the behavior is not a manifestation of the student's disability. In this case, the child can be disciplined just like any other student without a disability, except that you have to provide services, and we'll talk about what those services look like. And you see the specific regulation, federal regulation there. So the behavior is not the result of the child's disability, and it's not a result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. So the student can be suspended again or even expelled, if that was what the recommendation was for the same length of time as a child without disabilities, but the child has to continue receiving service. So let's talk about when services are required. Those services have to enable the child to continue to participate in the general curriculum and make progress toward his annual goals. They do not have to be an exact duplication of what the child's getting in the school setting, but they do have to be services that will allow him to still participate in the general curriculum and progress toward his IEP goals. Where do those services take place? They can take place in an interim alternative educational setting. It would be a setting other than the child's typical school setting, what he usually participates in. And who decides this if it's not a manifestation? The school personnel, which is usually the LEA rep administrator, in consultation with one or more of the student's teachers, decides what those services look like and where they will be delivered. I will caution you that a school cannot simply have the home setting as the only alternative educational setting. that could be one of the possible places a student receives services, but there can't be across the board. That's the only place we provide services in situations like this. Now remember, we're talking about a student that the manifestation determination review team has determined, no, this is not a manifestation. So as of the 11th day and any days forward that the student is suspended or expelled, if this is not a manifestation, the student still has to receive services that will allow him to participate in the general curriculum and progress toward the annual goals in his IEP, although in a different setting, and those services and settings are determined by school personnel in consultation with one or more of the teachers. So here's the summary. Services have to be provided, although in another setting, that would enable the child to participate in the general ed curriculum and progress toward meeting the goals. Let's say now that one or both of the questions for manifestation is answered as a yes. So let's say that the team determines that the behavior is a direct result of the child's disability, or it was a direct result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. Remember, this is an or, it's not an and. You don't have to answer both questions for it to be a manifestation. You only have to answer one question as yes. So let's say that the team has determined it is a manifestation of the child's disability. The team then has to return the child to the placement he was in when the behavior occurred, unless the parents agree to a change of placement or services through an IEP meeting. So let's say that a child is receiving 400 minutes of special education in a resource pullout setting, and he violates the school's code of conduct. The manifestation determination review determines it is a manifestation. He has to go back into that regular school setting where he's receiving the same amount of time per his IEP as he did before. And now the IEP team has to meet to either conduct a functional behavior assessment, unless one's already been done, and write a behavior intervention plan, again, unless one already exists, in which case the IEP team would have to meet to review the FIBA or conduct a new one if they determine that's appropriate, and review and modify the BIP as necessary to address the behavior. So if it is a determination that, if it is a manifestation of the student's disability, the child goes back to his school setting, the IEP team meets and determines how they're going to address the behavior, either through a FIBA and BIP or the revision of a FIBA and BIP, unless the parent agrees to a change of placement and services through an IEP team meeting. If the manifestation determination review team is unable to come to a consensus about whether the behavior is a manifestation of the disability, then just like in any other IEP meeting or similar to an IEP meeting, the LEA rep would make the decision as to whether the behavior was or was not a manifestation. At that point, the parent has a right to disagree with the decision by filing a due process complaint. If the parent files a due process complaint to disagree with a manifestation determination review, the child stays in the interim alternative setting until the matter is resolved. And I'm not going to go into all the details of a due process complaint in this situation, but it would be an expedited due process hearing, which means it would be a shortened timeline. So the parent has the right to disagree, just like the parent does with any IEP team decision. And in this case, the parent would disagree through filing a request for due process. Just a couple of reminders. A student of disability can be suspended up to 10 days cumulative over the school year for any violation of the school's disciplinary code that carries a penalty of suspension. We refer to these as your 10 free days. But once you've hit those 10 days, any and every time the student is suspended after that, there has to be a manifestation determination meeting held within 10 days. You have to notify the parent of the suspension and then determine whether or not the behavior was a manifestation of the disability or a result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. At the MDR, the team, which will be the LEA rep, parent, and relevant IEP team members, will answer the 2 MDR questions. If the answer to either one is yes, then the student is returned to his placement and you have an IEP meeting to determine how to address the behavior. Remember, every time the student is suspended after reaching the 10 days, there has to be an MDR. You have to provide services from the 11th day forward. How they're provided depends on whether or not it's a manifestation. If it is not a manifestation, school officials in consultation with at least one of the child's teachers determine what the services look like. If it is a manifestation, the IEP team determines what they look like. The only time the law requires you to conduct a FIBA and a BIP, remember this is required and you see the asterisk, is when the behavior was a manifestation. However, best practice tells us that a FIBA and or BIP may be needed regardless of the manifestation and way ahead of the 10-day usage of your 10 days. The other thing I'll just throw in here that I'm sure you're all aware of is that the research on suspension and changing students' behavior is not real good. You know, and you've dealt with a student who will look you straight in the face and say, I'm doing this because I want to be suspended. Suspension has not been proven a very valuable behavior change agent, so I would encourage you to look at FIBAs, look at positive behavior supports up front, try to be proactive in looking at behavior and excuse me, and addressing behavior. Again, you do have the 10 free days. The easiest way to avoid a manifestation determination review meeting, having to have one, is don't suspend the child for more than 10 days. I know that's much easier said than done. We will put directions for MDR, specific enriched directions, and some expanded guidance and a flow chart for disciplinary decisions. This is one of the areas in IDEA that I typically do not answer questions without having the regs in front of me. This is discipline for students with disabilities is clear as mud. Although the 2 manifestation determination questions have become much more direct and simple than they were prior to 2004 and the reauthorization, because you really are looking to answer the question, is there a direct cause by the disability of this behavior or a direct cause of failure to implement the IEP on this behavior? Not roundabout or might be. You really have to establish direct causes. Again, we'll put additional information on the bookshelf. A couple of enriching reminders, and I've thrown these in just kind of because they've come up recently, or it's been things that I had not thought of for a while. Every now and then, I know it's difficult to imagine and believe, but every now and then we do have an issue that makes Enrich inaccessible. Sometimes it's an issue with our district server, sometimes it's an Enrich issue, sometimes it's just the magic has failed to work. But there are times when Enrich goes down. Please make sure that you notify Kendall if you're having difficulties, and understand that the district staff will try everything possible to get access and get Enrich up again as soon as possible. William James, our district IT person, has come in the middle of the night to work on this kind of thing. He's come in at 5 o'clock in the morning. He has stayed till 8 o'clock at night when we've had Enrich issues. So please know that district staff is working as quickly as possible to fix whatever the issue is. You can be prepared, however, by having a plan B in place. If you don't have access to Enrich for a meeting, make sure that you're taking minutes to record all your decisions. Have some sort of signature page available to document attendance at the meeting. Make sure that you cover everything that would be in the prior written notice, because you filled out enough of them by now that you can probably quote all of those areas in your sleep. If the parent needs to sign consent for something like consent for services or consent for evaluation, make sure that they understand that you will send that consent to them and all other required information as soon as you've got access to Enrich. Again, parent consent for something is not something you can just get the parent to write out a statement for. You've got to have the actual parent consent from Enrich. But however, with signatures, you don't have to have the actual Enrich signature page, because remember, signatures for an IEP meeting, for example, aren't signifying that everybody agrees with the decisions. It's just a verification of who attended. Don't let the fact that Enrich is down delay a meeting. Do not cancel a meeting or reschedule a meeting because you don't have access to Enrich. Don't wait until the last minute to finish or print your drafts of information. I know that's not always unavoidable, but don't make it a practice to come in at 8 o'clock, try to log in Enrich to print things for an 8:30 meeting just to find out Enrich is down. Remember that you can't implement any changes to an IEP until the parent has received a prior written notice. So if Enrich is down and you're even though you've covered everything at the meeting that would be in the prior written notice, the parent actually has to receive a written notice. So you can't implement any of the changes that you've made until the parent receives that prior written notice. Records request. Make sure that when you have a records request from another school or another district, that you are sending the most current copy of the IEP or IEP amendment. Make sure you're sending the initial eval if that's all you've got, or the most recent re-eval, all of the accompanying signature pages. So if you're sending a re-eval, make sure you're sending the re-eval signature pages. Make sure you're sending the IEP amendment or the annual review signature pages, and progress reports. If you receive an IEP from another school district as a transfer that does not contain the progress monitoring method that was being used, or the data or the probe information, make sure that you add that information at your 30-day meeting. You might be able to use the previous school's baseline data to go ahead and enter probe information and progress monitoring information if the previous school has done a good job with baseline data. But if not, because every now and then we get an IEP from somewhere else that is not compliant or up to our standards with baseline information, you would have baseline information by the time you do your 30-day meeting after transfer, since that's the data that you've been collecting for 30 days. But again, just because the IEP from a previous district doesn't have the probe progress monitoring data in it doesn't mean you can continue without it. So you'll need to add it at least at your 30-day meeting. Special reviews and after a transfer but before the first annual review, remember you're going to click amend with this and amend any of the areas that you can, because you're working from transfer comparable data. If it's after the first annual review, make sure that you are, when you're amending, that you're adding new findings or present levels upon which you're making your decisions. Again, make sure that you're you're clicking amend and following the directions on the bookshelf and amending all of the areas on the IEP that you have access to. Again, with the Transfer Comparable Services IEP, you won't have access to all of the complete IEP that you would after the first annual review. For students who transfer within our district, this is not a transfer comparable services. This is picking up the IEP from the other school and simply implementing it. If you need to make changes in it, for example, and this isn't always the case, but if you've got a child going from virtual to brick and mortar within our district and you need to implement changes, you would hold a special review and make those changes based on data, just like you would any other change to an IEP. So students who come to you from another school in our district, this is not transfer comparable services. What will happen is that the previous school, for example, cyber, the Power School person will withdraw that person from Power School at cyber. The child enrolls at Spartanburg Prep, and cyber then goes in and ends special ed, move known to be continuing. Child enrolls at Spartanburg Prep. The Power School person at Spartanburg Prep activates that child in Power School, enters them in Power School at Spartanburg Prep, and then you would work with your district coordinator to reactivate that child in Enrich, so that once you have reactivated the child, you pick up and see everything that cyber has done. You have access to everything that went on at cyber, all the uploads and everything, but you Enrich has tracked that the child has moved from cyber to Spartanburg Prep. So for students who transfer within the district, we do have the cheat sheet on the bookshelf, transfers within the district. You do not do the 5-day transfer comparable services. You do not do the 30-day transfer meeting. You simply implement the IEP when the student transfers and then make any changes that you would need based on data that you're collecting through a regular special review IEP amendment. Just a reminder, based on a webinar that the department did yesterday, that if you've got a child that goes to another district, again, not within our school district, but to another district or another state, remember that in order to mark the child as moved known to be continuing, you don't need evidence that he's continuing to receive special ed in the new placement. All you need is evidence that he is continuing in an educational setting. And this was something that I had kind of forgotten until the webinar just the other day. So all you need is evidence like a gen ed records request from the other district, so that you can mark the student as moved known to be continuing. You don't have to have evidence that he has continued to receive special ed services in order to use this exit reason in Enrich rather than drop out. Let's talk about the changes to an IEP based on SC Ready and the change in testing from Aspire for spring 2016. The updates have been pushed into Enrich, so you should see the information now in Enrich as far as SC Ready is concerned. And so let's talk a few minutes about what kinds of changes and to whom these changes apply. As we noted in the January meeting, the parents of all students with IEPs in grades 3 through 8 must get some communication about SC Ready from the school. This would include students who are taking the SC Ready with no accommodations at all, just as they took the Aspire testing with no accommodations. This would include students who are taking any form of ALT assessment, SC ALT or NCSC. And this would also include students who were previously identified as needing accommodations on Aspire and will be getting either the exact same accommodations on SC Ready or different accommodations than on SC Ready. Remember that you're going to have this communication with the parent in one of 4 methods. The clarifying addendum would be used for all students who have no accommodations, who are taking one of the ALT assessments, or who have the exact same accommodations on SC Ready that they had on Aspire. And I mean the exact same. The clarifying addendum will simply be sort of a letter of communication to the parent that says, hey, we've got a new test in South Carolina, but your child's going to do what they've always done. Or if you've got an annual review that is scheduled prior to the administration of SC Ready after we get the Enrich update, when you go in to add IEP, like you would do for any annual review, once the update is there, you'll no longer see information about Aspire. The information for SC Ready will magically appear in the IEP template, and just as magically, the template will no longer have anything on Aspire. This will only happen after we get the update, and as of 2/10, we still don't have the update. But once we get the update, if you're going to have an annual review prior to SC Ready, you would handle that by clicking Add IEP, and as you go through the IEP template for your annual review, you will see the information for SC Ready, and you'll handle it through your IEP meeting. The third option will be used for all students that you need to make changes, adding or taking out accommodations that are going to make the accommodations different from the ones the student received on Aspire. You would use IEP amendment as a special review without a meeting if the LEA rep and parent agree to make these changes without a meeting. Use this for all students that currently have oral admin for writing, calculator use, and extended time on Aspire, since these are no longer allowable accommodations on SC Ready. So if you are making changes to the accommodations from Aspire, particularly taking out oral admin for writing, calculator use, or extended time, you will either do it through option 3 or 4. IEP amendment special review without a meeting if the parent agrees, or with a meeting if the parent wants a meeting. Remember, oral admin for writing, calculator use, extended time are no longer allowable accommodations on SC Ready, even if the student's IEP had them for Aspire. You know your parents, and you know which ones you're automatically going to have to make this change with a meeting. You know the parents that you can probably ask to agree to the changes without a meeting. If you've got a parent that you ask, would you agree to the changes without a meeting, and the parent says no, then you hold an IEP meeting, of course. When you're using options 3 and 4, the IEP amendments special review with or without a meeting, remember that you have to complete an IEP amendment cover page and a prior written notice, just like you always do. The difference, only for SC Ready accommodation changes, will be that you will not go in and click amend to the IEP like you would if this was a typical special review. If you were to try and do this, you would not get anything other than the Aspire information. So the department is telling schools, do not go back in and click amend for SC Ready changes. Now, this only applies to this SC Ready issue. For any other special review or IEP amendment that you're doing, you would go back and click amend and then make those changes in the IEP. But again, if you're using options 3 or 4, you will also do the IEP amendment cover page and prior written notice as usual. And again, the directions for Enrich, as soon as we get the update, will be posted, the step-by-step directions. ACT. Schools have to offer ACT to all 11th graders, but students may elect not to take the test. And of course, we do not know at this point whether the students will have to sign something to indicate the students are opting into the test or opting out of the test. This only refers to ACT. Work keys is still required for everyone. Jean Epps, our district test coordinator, has been sharing information about the ACT with both test coordinators and SPED coordinators. All other testing, again, is required, but we don't know at this point about opting into or opting out of the ACT. Jean did just send out some recent information that indicated you should plan right now for all students with disabilities who are taking the ACT and need to take it with accommodations to go through that approval process. Remember that accommodations on the ACT have to be approved. So you should go ahead and start the approval process since it takes a while. We will continue to post resources on the bookshelf. The assessment resources are available under the tab on the resource page of Assessment 1516. There's an FAQ regarding SC Ready that's there. This separate PowerPoint for SC Ready, as well as the February monthly webinar that contains information about SC Ready. The directions for how to handle these changes for SC Ready will also be on the bookshelf, the specific Enrich cheat sheets. And as always, if you have questions about SC Ready and how to handle this in Enrich, please let your district coordinator or me know. But go ahead, as soon as the ACT website is active, the test coordinators should go ahead and start that approval process because the student has to have ACT approval if the student wants college reportable scores. This is no different than last year. The Department of Ed is recommending that your school test coordinator go ahead and submit permission for allowable accommodations for all students with disabilities who would be eligible to take the test, even if the parent and the student decides later not to take the test. Again, work with your school test coordinator to ensure that the approval process has been started, and we will notify you as soon as we know what the opt-in or opt-out process will look like, and as we get additional information. There is an issue that I'm not going to go into with virtual schools and work keys online versus paper and pencil, but we are trying to handle that through the department and through ACT, and the virtual leaders have been made aware of this issue. If you'd like more information on it, if you've got any questions, if this kind of rings a bell, just let me know. I wanted to thank all of you for the January face-to-face meeting. Everybody participated so openly in our discussions about progress monitoring. You talked very openly about your challenges at the school level and how you're trying to assess student outcomes, how you're trying to monitor individual student progress, how you're trying to compare the progress of students with the IEPs to students without IEPs. And we will be sharing this information to the group at a later time and hopefully continue our discussions about how to improve student outcomes. We're looking at trying to offer an opportunity to continue this discussion maybe at the April professional development, optional professional development. Just a reminder, I do sometimes share PowerPoints that were developed by the State Department or the Office of Special Education Services at the State Department because they have useful school level information. Remember, if it's a State Department of Ed presentation, these are almost always designed for district personnel and not for specific schools. So any contact information in a State Department presentation would be for district use. If you've got any questions at the school level, please call your district SPED coordinator or me or someone else at the district office. Please don't call the State Department of Ed directly. Our district staff is set up to be your liaison with the Department of Ed. There will be times when we will refer you directly to someone at the Department of Ed, but the department's not large enough and doesn't have a large enough staff to be able to take calls from individual schools across the state. The other thing to remember with this is that the department sends in information to the districts, and then our district specifically flows it through to you with additional information and interpretation about how it may or may not apply to charter schools. So I will try to very clearly in the future designate what is a Department of Ed presentation, and if I can customize their presentation, I will take out any direct contact information for the Department of Ed or anything that might have to do with districts. A lot of times the department sends out their presentations in PDF form, so I'm not able really to take any of that out, but I'll try to make sure that those department presentations are clearly designated as coming from the Department of Ed. But if you have any questions, if you'll please remember to contact your district SPED coordinator, me, someone else at the district office, or if you have an outside SPED consultant, you certainly can contact them. A couple of dates. Our March 14th optional professional development I'm very excited about. We have an assistive technology specialist from the Office of Special Ed Services. And Madalena will be here to talk about the different types of AT devices, low-tech, high-tech, the available resources, and there is a lot on AT out there that I think our schools could be taking advantage of, and lots of other good information related to assistive technology. This will be our optional professional development on March 14th at the district office from 10 to 1. We do anticipate opening this up to others so that you may be able to bring your teachers, your OTs or speech therapists, but we'll send out additional information soon because our training room does have a limit of 50 folks, so we'll develop some sort of sign-up sheet. But this will be a professional development that if you want to bring additional folks from your school or send additional folks if you can't attend, this would be great for your occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech language therapists. I know that brings up the issue of most of you are contracting these folks as outside folks and might have to pay them an additional day, but we hope that you might be able to work something out with them so that they could get this information. And they certainly could get certificate renewal credit as part of their licensure or certification renewal for this as well. March 15th, reminder for CPR. Any schools that have a 2, less than a 2 in any area have evidence due on March 15th. Now there may be some schools that have an earlier due date, a February due date based on your school's school corrective action plan or district corrective action plan, but any school who has less than a 2 on an item on the CPR definitely has evidence due on March 15th. I do appreciate everything everyone is doing. We want to celebrate your successes. If you've got something going on at your school that you'd like others to know about, please contact Laura Bain, our Director of Communications at the district. She's got lots of ways to publicize what you've got going on in your schools. For example, Laura Merrick at Bridges just sent us information on a parent night that Bridges is putting on for parents there. We'd love to share information about what's going on in your schools, especially as it relates to special ed. So let us hear from you. Laura's a great contact. You can send her information. either at her email there or can talk to her by phone about how to get information about what you're doing in schools out to everybody. Hope everybody is staying warm and dry, and we will have a different format for our March webinar. We are no longer using GoToMeeting, so we will get you information about the new link through the WebEx system, and hopefully by the afternoon of March 14th I will have had a chance to play with it and be more comfortable with it. But that's it for the February broadcast.